Well, Morena, ko Roger Beaumont, toko noa. It's great to be here, isn't it? And thank you, Michelle, for the kind introduction. And apologies that you've got the B-list MC, but you know, I'll do my best. I'll battle on, and I think this is going to be a really good and hopefully interactive discussion as we go through this. I agree with what Michelle was saying earlier, that isn't it great we can all be in the room together and actually have a session like this and have a really good face-to-face engagement and discussion. Now, for the introverts in the room who are sitting there thinking, what is that guy on? And I'd much rather be in my bedroom watching this on Teams. It's okay. You have a friend in Slido, so you can send questions into this session without having to talk, without having to engage with anyone. You can just do it on your phone or your device, and that'll all be fine. So you can do that anonymously, or you can put your name to it. That's entirely up to you. So look, this session is about, as Michelle said, wanting to explore what financial storms customers are currently facing today, what they might be facing tomorrow, and also how banks are innovating to help those customers. And it's a really timely discussion, isn't it? I mean, I don't need to state the obvious about the cost of living challenges all New Zealanders are having to face as those things bite, and that particularly impacts our most vulnerable. And it's also a timely discussion because I think our banks, some of whom are represented up on the stage here today, are doing some really tremendous work in this space. By no means perfect. We've got a long way to go, and we acknowledge that, and we're really at the start of that journey in some ways. But I think in the last few years in particular, banks have put an enormous amount of time and energy and resource into thinking about what they can do to support and be there for vulnerable customers. So look, I'd just like to take a couple of moments to tell you a little bit more about the panellists, and then we'll rip into some questions and discussion. So immediately to my right, your left, we've got Liv Norman from Kiwi Bank. Liv is the Senior Manager in the Customer and User Experience Design team at Kiwi Bank. She is a strong advocate for Kiwi Bank's ongoing support of financial education programs like Banker, Stepping Up and Dora. In her 5 years at Kiwi Bank, she's been the business owner for 2 enterprise-wide transformational pieces of work, the Voice of the Customer program and Customer Experience Service Standards. And then next to Liv, we've got Martin King. Martin is the General Manager for Customer Assist at Bank of New Zealand. Martin has over 20 years' experience in financial services across New Zealand and the United Kingdom. He has led Bnz's support for customers in hardship, complaint resolution, conduct, social impact and vulnerability since November 2019. And prior to that, he held similar roles at Lloyds Banking Group in the UK. And so we were very fortunate to secure Martin's services here in New Zealand, and he's been a real advocate across the industry in terms of imparting some of his observations and learnings from his from the early part of his career in the UK. Next to Martin, we've got Rebecca Lanning, who is the Head of Customer Experience at ANZ. Rebecca has done this role for the last 3 years. She's led the creation of the Customer Experience function and is responsible for the Good Customer Outcomes programs and the strategy for customers with vulnerabilities and the infrastructure in which ANZ listens, learns and takes actions on their customer feedback. She's been with ANZ 17 years, been with the financial services industry 17 years, starting straight from kindergarten. And then finally, but last but certainly not least, the lovely Ros Shaw from ASB. Ros Clark, I should say. Wrong surname. Ros is the General Manager of Business Transformation and Outcomes at ASB. Her current role, a remit includes leading ASB's financial wellbeing program, championing the improvement of customer outcomes, advocating for the interests of vulnerable communities, providing customers with quality guidance and advice. A recent achievement for Ros has been the creation of ASB's Support Finder, which is a digital tool that has connected Kiwis with over $12.5 million to date in government benefits that they weren't aware they were entitled to or eligible for. So a really, interesting grassroots tool helping people to access funds that they were otherwise not tapping into. And Ros Clark has over 15 years experience in the financial services sector. So we're going to kick it off with some questions. And the first one I'm going to ask, what I'm going to do just to sort of give everyone a chance to have a bit of a quick chat to open it up, is I'm going to ask them a question and give them a 30-second window to answer that question, because bankers like to talk, don't we? So let's be honest. And I think if we keep to that, and then we'll have a bit more breathing space on the next question. So the first question is this, and in 30 seconds, I'm going to ask the team what trends you are seeing in terms of consumers' financial challenges right now. So who would like to go first? Or I can nominate Ros.
Thanks, Roger. Kia ora tātou. Okay, so trends, 30 seconds, got it. Okay, so, I mean, I think there's a really interesting dichotomy in this space. So overall, we're kind of seeing savings trend up, and COVID was a great driver of that, which is really positive. But on the other hand, we're seeing, 38% of our customers with increased payment problems. We're seeing customers who are, 41% of customers who have less than $1,000 in savings. We're seeing, trends in things like unarranged overdraft. So it's a really, really interesting space where on the one hand we've got increased savings across New Zealand generally, which is awesome, but then we've got this pocket of New Zealanders who are really, really struggling.
Thanks, Ros. Who'd like to go next? Should we just go along the row, then it just doesn't get awkward? Yeah.
Yeah, we can go along. Look, I'd replicate what Ros is saying. I think we're definitely seeing that people are struggling to manage the day-to-day. Through some of our financial wellbeing indicators we have in New Zealand and Australia, we're starting to see some of those metrics kind of dip a little bit, which is not the trend that we want to be seeing. So it is really hard for people kind of to keep up with their day-to-day expenses, let alone save for tomorrow and save even further for the future. So we're definitely seeing that coming through.
Martin.
The third person always has to kind of think, oh, God, I have covered two lots already. A couple of things we're seeing is, I think your point around some people are doing really well and some people are not doing well, so it's almost the K-shaped outcomes, and we're seeing that more and more. If we look at some of the spending habits, one thing we are definitely seeing is an increase in gambling. Gambling spending, particularly online, is driving up month on month all the time. But we're also seeing a lot of people reaching out for help. So the good thing is that I think customers' expectations of us as banks is rising, and actually it's up to us to meet that, and I'd actually encourage more and more to reach out for that support.
Thank you, Martin. Liv.
Going forth, that's got to be the hardest. So echoing what everyone said, and certainly the rise of online gambling and gaming. So a lot of that is offshore based, so not necessarily New Zealand providers of those services. We really saw that start to hit in COVID, particularly in the first lockdown. People were at home. A lot of people got the first support payment from the government, and for some people, a lot of that went straight to online gambling sites, unfortunately. The other big one, which has been mentioned this morning, is the buy now, pay later scheme. So also seeing a lot of that for customers. And for some it's not a problem, but for customers that might already be struggling financially and with cost of living rises, then that's just sort of another thing that hits.
Thanks, Liv. That's really interesting, just that two of the four of you have made that distinct acknowledgement of online gambling. And I'm just interested, let's just do a quick straw poll, because there's lots of people in the room who are dealing with this at the front line or grassroots of New Zealand. Is this a trend that you're seeing with your consumers, with the people that you're working with? Can you just put your hand up if you think that is an issue or a trend? Wow, that's really insightful. Thank you very much. Excellent. Let's move on and talk about what are some of the barriers, to financial well-being that you're observing amongst your customers. Anyone want to jump in on that?
I'm happy to start. So I think what we're observing, and talks about a lot about spending and the behavioural biases that humans have inbuilt in them. So I think there's a danger that we kind of consume. It's about that person is vulnerable, that person's in this situation, that person's got money. But actually it's their behaviour and their learned behaviour over time, but actually how they react in times of stress. And the thing about the gambling is what we've observed, certainly when we speak to people and say, why is it you're gambling? It's their route out. It's how they're dealing with their stress. So I think actually some of the barriers are understanding the social and human issues that sit behind spending behaviours, that sit behind debt choices. People aren't choosing to rack up lots of debt because they think it's a really good financial play. They actually can't see another way round it. They actually can't see another way through it. So our role is to kind of say, there are other options, there are other ways, and actually how do you help people, point people in those directions, or indeed when they get there, find a way out. Because I guess we as an industry have a way, and we have lots of tools to actually help people move around that. But I think there's this danger, we'll just have this assumption that there's a box of people called the vulnerable people, and they all behave in a certain way, and we're there to save them. But actually it's about understanding their circumstances and how they've got there to then actually help them move out and go to a different direction.
Yeah, I agree with that, Martin, and just wanted to add another sort of dimension here, which is that I think on the customer side, as Martin said, like customers want better financial well-being, but also banks and other providers, we have the tools, the knowledge, the know-how, right? So I think one of the biggest barriers is kind of how do we break down friction in this process, because we both want the same outcome. So how can we, as banks, make our processes easier, remove friction, create nudges, make it easy for customers to make better choices? So it's not about, customers, New Zealanders, Kiwis should be in control of their financial goals, their financial situation, and the onus is on us as providers to make that easy, to make it easier to get to that destination.
I completely agree, and I'd just add to that. I think in terms of some of the behavioural biases that we have too, we're really focused on the present. So how do we provide those nudges and tools at the right time for people? Because if you time that wrong, it won't have the right impact. So it's a combination, I guess, of all of these things coming together and really designing it with our customers so that it actually meets the need at the right time.
Great, thank you. What are some of the more unknown issues that surface for Kiwis in these circumstances? What are the things that perhaps surprise you or you kind of are caught off guard with when you see them rise to the surface?
Go on, Liv, you go. I'll
Go, Liv.
go first every time otherwise.
I was going to say one of the things that we've seen that I find surprising, but then I've seen it to happen to lots of people I know, is the rise of scams recently, and that often it can be across many industries, but it often has a financial impact at the end of it, which lands in our laps as banks. Just seeing how, smart people get tricked into things all the time. I've had it happen to family members, I've had it happen to friends. That's something I think takes a lot of customers by surprise. The other one, just going back to the gambling, is, that's a really tricky one for some of our customers. And we get a lot of customers thinking that that's a fraud problem when money has come out of their account, and actually it's a customer originated issue where they've given their details to a gambling site, they've signed up to something like that, but it's landing in our fraud teams rather than necessarily in the teams that are the customer care teams, so being able to direct those customers to the right place.
I guess a lot of this isn't new. I would say, well, whilst you say new trends, a lot of it actually, though, is bubbling to the surface because we're seeing it get to critical stage. So actually when other costs are going up, the impact of their finances is just, now that's where it's butting up against. So some of these issues that they're not new. And one of the things that we are certainly diving into a lot is around the impacts of relationships, whether healthy or unhealthy, and when those relationships split, how do both parties exist? Now, we talked a lot about the gender gap in terms of savings. Unfortunately, some of those other issues then play out in debt. So there is a real difficulty with coerced debt. There's a real difficulty with, they'll call it STDs, or sexually transmitted debt as well. And these are real problems that live with people for many, many years. and actually is one of the biggest holds keeping people in unhealthy relationships. So, but these are issues that aren't new. The customers that we speak to, these are not 1 year, 2 year COVID issues. These are 5-year, 10-year, 25-year marriages and relationships that are built upon debt and the locks that sit around it. So I don't think it's new. What we do have, I think, now as an industry and indeed a whole community that's saying enough's enough, and actually we need to start tackling it.
And just to add to that, I think we're actually, I agree. Some of these things are not new, but I think we're becoming more alive to some of these issues than we have been before. So I think another example of something that has been a challenge for a long time, but we're just sort of starting to grapple with and learn about is how do we kind of unlock Māori land and lending on Māori land, and Roger and the team are doing some great work on that. And that's just another example where that's been a challenge for a long time, but we're sort of awake, as an industry, we're waking up to some of these things and leaning into them more than we have in the past.
Great, thanks guys. So that was some really good, I think, interesting initial observations. Remember that you can contribute to the questions. You don't have to just put up with my questions, so feel free to submit a question on Slido. I want to move on and talk about what the banks are doing to innovate and help in this space. And as I said earlier, I do this very clearly in the context that we are by no means perfect, and I don't think anyone sitting on this stage would say we're at near any state of nirvana. There's a lot of work to do, but I think there has been some good progress made, particularly in the last few years. And what I'd like to talk about first of all is the rise in bank vulnerability programs. And I'm sure the audience is quite interested in what's driven the development of these programs and what's made you as banks decide to actually build them. Ros?
Yeah, okay. So I think, it would be disingenuous to not acknowledge the fact that regulation has, been a driver of our focus on vulnerability. So just want to start by saying that. But I wanted to add a couple of other thoughts on this one because I think they're really important. And one of those, I think, drivers has been sort of what I was saying a couple of minutes ago, that as a society, I think we are much more cognizant of inequality, social issues, the disadvantaged, and I think as a society, we don't want people to be unintentionally disadvantaged by things like bank processes, as an example. So I think that's definitely contributed. And then the other thing that's been on my mind recently has, as I've worked on financial wellbeing and at ASB and also customer vulnerability, it's been like such an amazing experience to work with people, New Zealanders, Kiwis in our organisation who just care so deeply about this work. And I think we know as an employer, and many of you are employers in the room, that people actually want meaning in their work. People want meaning and purpose in the work that we do every day. And I think these kinds of programs give our people meaning. And when you have meaning, it unlocks passion, it unlocks energy, it unlocks drive. So while we're kind of sitting here representing banks today, we're also representing, communities of people who sit in our organisations who really want to make a difference. So.
Just to add to that, obviously we've also got parent groups in Australia, so they're a little bit probably more advanced than New Zealand around some of the regulation and their vulnerability programs. So that's been a great opportunity for us to learn and beg and steal some of those frameworks. But I think to Ros's point, some of our staff have been doing this for a long time. So it's actually putting the frameworks around it to give them the right support. But also we've learnt over the last few years and through COVID, vulnerability can affect anyone. It's not a group of people, it is many people and many people in this room. So it's about building the awareness of that and then really meeting the needs of our customers. So if we can do that more broadly, we'll make a better experience for everybody, better outcomes for everybody.
What those guys said. But I'd also add your point, Ros, about humans. And this is a human edge of banking. And the great thing is once you start digging into processes, experiences at a very human level, and then share those back with people that run business units, run banks, actually they're all humans. Well, we might not think they are the way they kind of do things, but when you actually say to them, this actually could be your family member, and then there's the bright spark that unfortunately does become their family member. I remember when I first turned up to New Zealand, I went to talk to our board, and we're talking about gambling, and we were talking about the debt created by gambling and how that's a big issue. And a board member said, that was my nephew. And immediately you have somebody that's on the board of one of the biggest banks in New Zealand, acknowledging it's their family, it's their people, and that then starts to understand that actually the world around vulnerability, rather than vulnerable, is what we need to consider. And it is anybody. It is the scam. I've yet to see a scam where they say, oh yeah, could have seen that coming, they should have known. It affects everybody. The bigger the amount of money, the smaller amount of money, it doesn't matter. There's still somebody's life has been taken over by somebody else and they've been persuaded to give up their money. But that is a lot. It's a really hard thing to understand. So I think that's what's driving then, can we get better? Can we take our complaints? How do we learn from those? What are the concerns? What are the root causes? And how do we make sure that doesn't happen again?
And Liv, Kiwibank has been doing some quite successful, innovative work in this space. Do you want to share some of those stories?
Yeah, I think one piece of work that we're really proud of at Kiwibank is our voluntary online gambling block. So we trialled that in September 2020 and went live to all customers April last year, 2021. And so what that is if a customer has got a problem with gambling, it needs to be self-identified or maybe brought up by one of our staff, but the customer agrees that we can block merchant codes from those gambling sites on their Visa credit or debit card. And that's been really effective and really powerful for a great number of customers for us. So just things like that, it might seem like a small or simple thing, but it can actually make a huge difference in those customers' lives. Just to echo those other things, I think one of the biggest changes has been banks have always had programs for vulnerable customers or situations of vulnerability. What I think we've seen through the last few years is banks being a lot, and definitely at Kiwibank, a lot more proactive, so reaching out to customers, letting them know what support's there, as an industry being a bit more joined up on it, which is awesome, and also partnering a bit better. So, for example, at Kiwibank, we have partners where if a customer's been through fraud or a scam, we can refer them to those partners, which can help rebuild things like, okay, now that the bank solved this, what do I do about my credit score? How do I rebuild my credit score? What are the next steps? Because it does, as you say, it has can have a long-term impact. So what else can we do to wrap around that customer and help them move forward and not fall prey to something like that going forward?
Excellent, thanks Liv. Look, we're getting lots of great questions in on Slido, so I'm going to go to those now, and you have been voting for them, so I'll try and make this as democratic as possible and go with the most popular questions or the most highly endorsed questions. But one of them just relates to what we've just been talking around, vulnerable people. And the question is, many banks' hardship processes rely on people reaching out, yet many vulnerable people can't. What are banks doing to proactively reach people in most hardship?
Can I kick off?
Sure.
So I'm responsible for BNZ's hardship processes under Triple CFA. The first part is make it easier. So I know I've actually got my team in the room, so I can say this. They are looking at the forms. How can you make this simpler? How can you ask somebody to fill out a statement of position when they don't know what a statement of position is? And you as the bank own most of that information. So that, I think, is number one. Make it as easy and as simple as process, and also remove the shame. So one of the things when we talk about innovation, innovation is trust and listening. So actually trust the customer, what they say. Don't treat every customer as a won't pay. Actually consider whether they can't pay. That, I think, is really, really important. And actually, how do we bring that to life? In terms of reaching out, I've been involved in many, many different ways of you send emails, you send text messages. Humans are humans, and I think we have got a lot more study to do around how you use what we would describe as marketing approaches to encourage people to reach out for help. So rather than get this wonderful TV or go and buy this wonderful computer, actually here, try and get your finances sorted. Can we take the same scientific approach that we do on that? And I think we've got a long, long way to go.
Yeah, look, we've definitely... It's on? Thank you. Look, definitely over the last few years, we have taken a more proactive approach to using the information that we have got to reach out to customers, and especially those that we can identify may need more help than others. But Martin's touched on a really important point in that in some of our customer research, we found customers wait a really long time before they come to their bank and almost too late. So how do we help educate our friends, our family, people that we know? Because often we go to friends and family first, but also we might leave it a long time before we talk to anyone about our finances. So we do need to get a lot more comfortable with talking about our finances so people understand some of the common situations and where to go for help. But yeah, the banks are definitely trying hard to make it easier, more accessible, and educate people on that point around coming as soon as you can. Makes it easier to work through options.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think I've got a nice piece of data on this one, actually. We've been kind of, as others banks have been, trying to get a bit more proactive, and I think early engagement is really important. So this is kind of before a customer is really in serious hardship. We've been trying to figure out when are those earlier intervention points. And I think there's a really interesting trust dynamic there between kind of us as big financial institutions and customers, and how do we kind of how do we as banks proactively reach out in a way that's inclusive and doesn't feel, sort of big brotherish. That's something that we've been really testing and learning through different pilots and things. But the trend that we're seeing is actually, if I look at all of our customers that are working with our financial assistance team at the moment, over 50% of those cases have been customers that have reached out proactively to the bank rather than it getting to like quite a serious point and us sort of, reaching out to the customer. And that balance of 50% of customers proactively reaching out to us, that is, that's new. A few years ago, that certainly wasn't the case. So I think that's a great sign that, that things are shifting.
Great, thank you. Look, sorry, I'm just catching up with this. And look, this is a really relevant question, I think, from the room. It's been a very popular question, and it's kind of the flip side of banks being proactive with customers facing challenges. The question is, what actions are banks taking to create an easier way for mentors to communicate directly with the bank?
I'll go.
Thank you.
I think this is actually an area we've got a lot of work to do. Not necessarily how to influence people. Yeah, keep going. And I think actually this is about how we work within, my team will know I love a bit of regulation, a bit of compliance, but actually how do we make sure we don't get tripped up by it in terms of the joys that is privacy, the joys that is triple CFA, the joys that is FISLA. I can keep going with as many acronyms as we want to go, but actually giving challenges to those that normally build the controls around this to make us work harder. And I think actually this, to me, I think would be a really, really useful thing for us to come together as an industry is how do we make that seamless? How do we make that far, far easier? How do we have that relationship? And that, again, that's that trust. So when somebody says, I'm working with X person, we go, cool. Where do we start? What do we need to work on? How do we also use that word trust with you as much as we want to try to drive with it, trust with the customer? We are starting from a really low base of, no, we will only talk to the customer. So I think there's actually lots to be done. And having seen it in other parts of the world, once you start it, it actually gets more complicated because actually making sure we've got to have trust, actually, do we have the right level of capability across the whole mental network? Do we have the same level of data that they have access to that others don't? So I think that both sectors also need to rise up. And then once we've actually risen up, we can actually do a far better job.
And look, we were talking about this in our office yesterday. We heard a story of the frustration for a mentor of filling out the authorization form that allows them to have access to the customer's information and running into difficulty just in the bureaucracy of the bank involved. And, that's disappointing for us as an industry that processes and systems that are in place not working as smoothly as they should. And we apologise for that. That's not good enough. It shouldn't be like that. And we as a result of that conversation yesterday are reminding our banks about the importance of following those processes. But on the flip side, you've got to remember that each of the banks represented here employ up to 5,000 people. So there's a lot of process to get that message to the frontline person in Ashburton who needs to understand the practical reality of that. So I'm not saying that's good enough, but please understand these are complex processes. Okay, so let's go into the next high rating question, which is, why do all the major banks close people's accounts when they become insolvent? People need an account to get income. Why put them into further hardship? Anyone want to tackle this one?
I mean, I can actually do a bit of marketing here for a second and say...
You go, girl.
Yeah. Well, ASB actually does have a solution to that. So if anyone in the room has customer challenges with that, we can provide access to a bank account for insolvent customers. So.
As can Kiwi Bank.
And me.
Free plugs are us. There we go.
I think that, so the difficulty...
No pressure, Martin and Rebecca.
We can tick that as well. But the difficulty being is where, particularly where that customer had a debt with us. So I think what we actually need to do, again, is how we work as an industry together. So if somebody has a debt with us, in particular on an overdraft on their transactional account, as part of the insolvency, we've kind of got to shut that down. And again, once that becomes a bad debt, that if you again get into the other side of the regulation with the prudential regulation, are you then offering debts and facilities to a customer you've already identified as being poor? That would be seen as poor lending. So I think what we actually need to do is have much better signposting, particularly for you and your communities, to say, shut with me, Ros has already said should help, likewise it'll be the other way round. So there are always two sides to the regulatory hat, and particularly those that deal with the prudential regulation. We can't be seen to be lending to a customer where they've actually been gone insolvent, because that would be seen as really poor behaviour and kind of credit crunch behaviour, which we saw back at the late 2000s, 2008. So that's why.
Excellent. Well, you've got a great solution in front of you now. The next question I'm going to go to, and I'm going to answer the first part of this to give the team a little bit of time to think about it, is how do we make it easier for the elderly and rurally vulnerable to access their banking? So some of you may or may not be aware of a program that we're coordinating with 6 of our banks, the 4 represented on the stage here, plus Westpac and TSB, where we're piloting a series of regional banking hubs in small communities throughout New Zealand. We've got 4 going at the moment, and we've just announced another 4, so by this time next year we'll have 8 of these up and operating throughout the country. And the purpose of these is to provide very basic banking services and engagement in communities that either have very, very limited branch banking services or no branch banking services. And they're a place for those particularly elderly and rural customers, some of whom feel disengaged digitally from the digital relationship that most of us have with our bank, and a place for them to go and be walked through either the transactions that they want to make, or to have a scheduled meeting with a representative of their bank to discuss their specific questions or concerns, or they can actually go in and do work on an iPad to learn how to do some digital banking, or in a safe place make a confidential call to their bank. So that's an industry-wide initiative. There's been a huge amount of work go into that, and there's more to come. But that's one of the very practical things we as an industry are doing to address that question. But I don't know if any of you want to answer that specifically for yourselves. Ros?
Yeah, maybe I'll kick off and then hand over. I mean, first of all, it's been really great to be, as an industry, working on this problem, and we're really leaning in to kind of learn how to solve this challenge. But I think it's what we have kind of acknowledged is one solution's not really going to cut it. And one of the things we've done at ASB is in the last, I think it was about 12 to 18 months ago, we started a brand new team called the Community Banker Team, and their whole job is literally community outreach. So they're all across the country. They work with community groups to do exactly what Roger's just been talking about. So they work with age concern, they work in the family violence space, they work in remote communities, and they run workshops. They help older customers to engage with digital banking if that's what they want, or they will just help with simple banking services. So we're seeing that as just another tool to help lean into this challenge.
Thanks, Ross. We've also done some work which sort of came to light through the lockdown. So we started an over 70s line in our contact centre. So customers that called in were directly directed to that team. So specialised to kind of support our customers to take them through any of the banking needs that they needed to. And we've continued that on. So outside of lockdowns, branches have reopened, but we've really acknowledged the value that service has brought for our customers and our bankers. So we get lots of great feedback through that channel.
I think, as Roz and Rebecca have said, it's really a combined approach, so having lots of different options. One thing Kiwibank does, we partner with Stepping Up, which is about digital education. So they have a mobile bus, Dora, that goes around rural and isolated communities, and people have the opportunity to come along and learn about how to do digital banking if that's what they're interested in. But it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So I think it's important the joint branch community hubs that we've done as an industry, having phone lines, having dedicated phone services when people want those. It really is about having lots of different tools on offer.
Cool, let's move on. The next question is about what are your banks each doing around ensuring all staff, not just customer service teams, are equipped to be culturally responsive to Māori?
I'll kick off. So I think there's two important parts. We have a dual Māori strategy. So one is around our colleague. So we actually have a head of Māori colleague, which is looking at actually how do we uplift all of our staff. So that's a really, really important part. That's not just about training, that's actually making sure our teams reflect the communities that we support. Okay, that's number one. And then number two is actually, I think, similar to all of us along here, we have heads of Māori banking. So actually, are we actually meeting the needs of our Māori communities out in their communities? And Ros, you recognise the lending on Māori land. How do we structure this work? So I think certainly from our perspective, we have a dual strategy that is really gathering pace. And I've seen that pace gathered since I've actually been in New Zealand, which is the last 2.5 years. I feel like I've come at a really good time because I'm kind of seeing this constant change and constant reinforcement of a variety of Te Ao Māori and Te Reo.
Yeah, same. So ANZ launched a couple of months ago our Takari Arangi strategy, which is our Te Ao Māori strategy. So part of that is around building that capability internally for all of our staff, but it's much broader than that, and it stretches out to 2040. So we've got a lot of work to do, but it is stretching into our products and services and how we can think about that in much better ways, as Ross touched on earlier as well.
Similarly at Kiwibank, we have Head of Māori Advisory, Te Aho, who will be speaking tomorrow, I think. Just looking at him in the distance there. And that's really about looking at what we can do for our staff, but also our customers. Banks do have a long way to go in this, so in a lot of respects the industry is, traditionally dominated by the pale stale male. No shade thrown to those on stage. But we at Kiwibank, for example, we have specific programs that our people team are leading to make sure that the people that work at the bank represent the communities we serve. That is Māori communities. That is making sure we have more young people, more women, more Pacific people. So it's about making sure that we reflect that. It is a long-term thing, but we're stepping up to it.
Yeah, I just feel like saying ditto. I mean, ASB's...
That's fine.
Yeah. I mean, same. But it's an area that we are actively focused on. Recently have launched a Te Ao Māori strategy and, all of the above.
Great. There's a question on Slido that says, how will banks address vulnerable clients who don't fit current policies or tick their boxes? Which is a tough question, right? Because, any thoughts on that?
Tell us. So reach out. So if there are things that we can do better, so it comes back to the listen and trust. Again, at BNZ, we've created a special team called the Bnz Support Team. It started looking specifically at the impacts of economic abuse and interpartner violence. That was 2 years ago. The remit of that team now covers gambling addiction, self-harm, mental health, elder abuse, and constantly the team are saying, we need some help, we need some people, because I've got another case. I've got another customer who we don't necessarily have the setup for. So the first part is know that team exists, and a number of us are doing similar work, but we don't know what we don't know. And I really encourage it. And this is probably the point, going back to why we do vulnerability, is we are now kind of turning ourselves from looking at the mirror to get rid of the mirror and look at the communities and say, how can we help? What do we need to do? We will not be able to do everything overnight. So that's always the caveat. But please do let us know what doesn't fit, what doesn't work, and we'll set about changing it.
Yeah, I mean, Martin's just put it so eloquently. We at ASB, we also have recently established an extra care team for exactly the same reasons. It's very new, and I think around one thing we're really trying to understand and pick apart is what is the role that we as banks should play in this space, and where do we need to partner? So where do we need to work with many of you in the room and others to make sure that the customer, looking at the customer's challenge with a really holistic lens, because the reality is, there is only so far that we should go with some of these cases, and that we definitely need to partner.
Great. Now, look, we've got a question on open banking, which is a relatively technical field, but and maybe outside the expertise of our panelists. But it's been a very popular question, so I am, in the interest of transparency, I will ask it, and I might attempt to answer it a little bit and then throw open to you guys. But the question is, open banking would benefit many fintech organisations that are wanting to help improve Kiwis' financial well-being. Is this a priority for you to look into? And look, what I'd just say on this is that, look, it's been a really interesting exercise to watch open banking initiatives overseas in other jurisdictions, and actually there hasn't been a phenomenal take-up of the services that are offered with open banking technology. But I think it will be coming here, and watch this space. But I think we've got to be really clear about what is the question we're trying to answer with something like this. What's the problem we're trying to fix? We've got some research, for example, that indicates that about 2/3 of New Zealanders are either negative or not sure about the concept of open banking. When it's explained to them in very simple terms, they're either not sure or negative on whether it's a good thing. And the reason for that is after telling customers for decades that they should protect their data at all costs, we're inviting customers to open up their data for the purposes of open banking. And so I think clearly, regardless of what happens or not from a regulatory point of view, there's a massive education job that needs to happen if it were to come in terms of educating New Zealanders about what it means, because there is an inherent discomfort with that. So that's my initial thoughts. I don't know if any of the panellists have got any comments. Yeah, Rebecca.
Yeah, so I mean, I would just say yes. We have an open banking team. They're doing a lot of work in this space, and I think it's not necessarily the big things that we're thinking about. It might just be who can we partner with to deliver something for customers that we would historically have built in-house. So that work is definitely underway, and I think we'll see that come to fruition more in the next few years.
Yeah, I would echo that and just say I think the industry is definitely open to it. For us, it's that balance between customer experience, so something that might look and feel great and be exciting to customers, and I think about buy now, pay later schemes, which have made it so easy, it's frictionless, the customer experience is amazing, but what's the customer outcome at the end of that? And making sure that we help get the balance right between that before we unleash it on customers.
Great, thanks guys. Look, we're very nearly out of time, so I just want to finish up with a forward-looking question for the panel, thinking about where to from here. And I'll start at this end, just in a spirit of fairness this time, and we'll go along. But the question is, where do you see the most significant opportunities lying going forward? And if you had a magic wand, what would you change in terms of customer experience in relation to bank services? Liv.
If I had a magic wand, I think being able to offer way more bespoke and tailored services for people, and where and when people want them. So if I look at where customers typically turn to advice for at the moment is family and friends, it's social media, it's influencers, it's TikTok and things like that. And making sure that we're present in those places. I think, again, it's that balance of we hold a lot of data as banks that's extremely powerful, but how can we serve that up in a way for customers that is helpful and not sort of overreaching when we look at being bespoke. But, yeah.
Martin.
I'll use my magic wand first. So my magic wand would be used around financial capability at the point of when people need it. So I think we talked about schools. The last time I sat and did my French exam was at 16. I've not used my French since. If I went into a boulangerie, I'd be struggling to ask for a pain au chocolat. However, what I would like is somebody at that time to help me and make that a very easy transaction and make sure I buy the right pastry. So I think actually how do we do point-in-time financial capability effectively throughout somebody's whole life and be proactive and reactive to them. So that's my magic wand, and I think that actually is what the future looks like. How do we use that data to spot when person need help, and how do we then effectively provide that?
Rebecca.
My magic wand will fix two things, first, in a slightly different approach to my other panellists. So firstly, wait times in contact centre has been a real pain point for us in the last couple of years, and I don't think anyone is not been affected by that, so I'd like to fix that. And frauds and scams, what a headache for our customers, for us. We're seeing so many more. I mean, some of you might have got an email from me this week. It wasn't from me. Very disappointing to see, so I'd fix that as well. Future focus, yeah, completely agree. It's around the financial wellbeing, but it's doing it in a way where it's simple, it's proactive, but it answers the questions that people have in everyday life. So how do we translate it in a way that's relatable for people and it makes a difference? So I think that's where we need to get to.
And Roz, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Gosh, yeah, what a great
What they
panel.
said?
Yeah, no, but I do have an extra. So I think it's kind of back to this idea of banks are really, really good at the black and white. We're good at process, we're good at ticking boxes and all those sorts of things. We're not so good at operating in the grey, and that's an area that we're really trying to lean into. And so what I would do with my magic wand is kind of just try and remove all of the friction in our processes that make conversations between customers and banks challenging, whether it's language that we use, whether it's processes, whether it's forms, systems. And then I guess the flip side of that coin, from a future focus perspective and what we're leaning into with our financial wellbeing program is really nudging customers to better outcomes. And just a couple of really quick examples of that, small examples, but still powerful for the customer. Things like alerting customers to avoiding unarranged overdraft and avoiding all the fees that go with that, or reminding customers to, pay their credit card on time to avoid fees. So we've saved customers $50 million in fees in the last 12 months from just looking into areas in process and that sort of thing around fees. So I think there's plenty of opportunity in this space.
Thanks, Roz. Well, look, I don't know about you, but I've found this a really interesting discussion. We'll all be around over morning tea if we didn't get to your questions, and I'm sorry we didn't get to all your questions on Slido. There were lots of them, but I'm sure any of the team would be happy to engage one-on-one if you had a burning question you wanted to ask. But please thank our panel of Roz, Rebecca, Martin, and Liv, and thank you very much.